Here is Immortal Moments for explanation. Friends, like videos and subscribes to our channel. Tales of Herding Gods episode 97 explanation. So let's start our explanation. Imperial Preceptor's wife had also come to the Temple of Heaven. As she watched Qin Mu return the sword to its sheath and Emperor Yangfeng focus on his back, worry crossed his young woman's brow. The bloody battle was soon pacified. Those monks and Taoists of Great Thunderclap Monastery and Tao sect that could escape had escaped while the rest had been killed. The majority of them had died here, and their blood dyed the Temple of Heaven red. Blood trickled down from the 999th step all the way to the first step, then flowed to the feet of all the envoys, cult masters, and sect masters. Temple of Heaven, this place in which tributes were offered to heaven, had been dyed the red of blood. It was impossible to say who was the first to suddenly kneel down and shout out, "Long live, Your Majesty!" Whoosh! At the bottom of the Temple of Heaven, no matter if they were officials, envoys, sect masters or cult masters, they all knelt down on one knee and shouted in unison, "Long live, Your Majesty!" Emperor Yangfeng turned around while standing at the top of the stairs. He spread his arms and faced the worship of these subjects. After a moment, he raised his hands weakly and said, "Rise." Imperial Preceptor's wife looked at Emperor Yangfeng. Behind him, Qin Mu and the 8 great supervisors were also standing on top of the Temple of Heaven and didn't kneel down. "Husband, it might not be a good thing for Cult Master Qin to show off his ability," she whispered to Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. He took a glance at Qin Mu and shook his head. To him, Eternal Peace Empire is just a place to learn through experience, so killing the Crown Prince is also merely an experience. He doesn't have much to worry about, and the Emperor does need his support in many places. Imperial Preceptor's wife was astonished. "Experience?" Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor nodded. "Experience. The Crown Prince colluded with Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery to plan a rebellion, conspiring to murder the Emperor and seize the throne. The consequences of these actions were no small matter. Yet in the records of the scribes, there would only be an ordinary sentence which said, on the 18th of the 2nd month, Crown Prince Yuxia conspired to rebel. 6th of the 3rd month, executed. It was this simple. The details regarding this were not for outsiders to know. That's why most of the stories would only appear in history as popular legends. However, most of them were distorted truths, so they couldn't be trusted. After the rebellion came a bloody purge. The officials of the Crown Princes had their properties seized and families executed. The Taoists and monks from Tao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery were detained in custody and sent to the execution grounds. Executions were carried out in the food market all the way from the 7th of the 3rd month to the 1st of the 4th month. Only then did the executions end. Some incidents also happened in the meantime. For example, the Crown Prince's head was not found. It had vanished without a trace, and no matter how everyone searched the surroundings of the Temple of Heaven, the head couldn't be found. In the end, Emperor Yangfeng never ordered anyone to dig into it. The Emperor instead passed down his decree to rid Crown Prince Ling Yuxia's name from the imperial family's genealogical record. The Crown Prince's birth mother, the previous empress who was already deceased, was also demoted to an imperial concubine. Emperor Yangfeng then replaced the officials and selected a few younger imperial scholars from Imperial College to promote. He also selected capable people from each and every army to replenish the empty official positions. A few days later, the Emperor summoned Second Prince Ling Yushu back from the borders to talk about his duties. After a few more days, the Emperor felt his body slightly ill and conferred Ling Yushu as the Crown Prince, to supervise the empire and manage all the politics. Emperor Yangfeng summoned Crown Prince Ling Yuxia and asked him, "Yuxia, now that you're managing the politics, what's the first thing you have to do?" He didn't view highly this second son of his. Ling Yushu wasn't considered outstanding among his children. Among all of them, he wasn't the one with the greatest resolution, and his aptitude wasn't the most outstanding either. For those two things, he had admired Ling Yuxia very much. That child had had the resolution, courage, and aptitude, however, he was too bold and too resolute. Meanwhile, his other elder sons had died too early while waiting for him to step away. Ling Yushu pondered for a moment. He had just returned from the battlefield, and the few months of experience had given him a pressing heroic spirit and some decisiveness. Because he was not in the capital city when Ling Yuxia had colluded with Great Thunderclap Monastery and Dao sect to rebel, he had escaped unscathed. Ling Yuxia said solemnly, "Son will abolish big brothers." Emperor Yanfeng's expression sunk. "You're the eldest son now, I don't have a son like him." Ling Yushu paused for a while, then said, "Son will abolish the treaties he had signed with the foreign countries and take back the land we have given away. I'll then purge those sects that had tried to swallow the lands during the chaos. Seeing how Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery have suffered such a defeat and lost a great number of experts, I will take back more than half of the lands that belong to Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery." Emperor Yanfeng's expression softened, and he asked, "Then? I will help Father send disaster relief, but before that, I will first write down a decree of my crimes." Emperor Yanfeng suddenly burst in anger and shouted out, "Say it once more." Ling Yushu bowed and said solemnly, "I will first write down a decree of my crimes and pray for heaven to not send any more disasters to appease the hearts of the citizens." Emperor Yanfeng's face was still grim when he said coldly, "Who taught you that?" Ling Yushu was slightly stunned. I asked, "Who taught you that?" Emperor Yanfeng rose, unable to restrain his anger. As he walked to and fro, he shouted loudly, "You are my son, I know you inside out, and you are unable to say such things." These words aren't what the second prince would be considering, but something that could only be understood by standing at the position of the emperor. "Say, who taught you that?" Cold sweat broke out on Ling Yushu's forehead, and he suddenly gritted his teeth to say honestly, "When I returned to the capital, I went to visit Imperial Preceptor and coincidentally met Palace Grandee treating Imperial Preceptor's injuries. This son discussed with them about how Father would inquire me about politics to test me, thus I asked them for ideas." Emperor Yanfeng's anger subsided, and he asked calmly, "Who was the one who suggests writing a decree of your crimes?" Both Imperial Preceptor and Palace Grandee said it. They said this calamity was the act of heavenly God, so why don't we go according to their will and plan slowly? If we go against them directly, we will only be defeated. For me to write a decree on my crimes is better than Father writing it himself. If Father writes a decree, it will mean you that deny the reform, but this son is the crown prince, so I can feign civility. Emperor Yanfeng's expression softened and he sat down. "I know your abilities and wisdom, your courage and insight, so I know you wouldn't have thought about such things yet. That's why there was definitely someone who had taught you that, and that's why I acted angry. Even if I'm asking you about politics, there's no need to follow what they taught you, you have to say your own understanding as well." Ling Yushu acknowledged. Emperor Yanfeng sighed. "I'm not worried about Imperial Preceptor, the Palace Grandee. I'm afraid that when a day comes when Imperial Preceptor and I are no longer around, you won't be able to outdo him. Now that my cultivation is lost and my divine treasures are destroyed, it's hard for me to train my cultivation back, so I made you supervise this empire, manage all the politics. You should be cautious and conscientious. If I can't regain my cultivation back, my lifespan will at most be some 50 years. When that time comes, you will be the emperor. Broaden your horizons and also broaden your breadth of mind, think more by yourself." And at this moment, on Saint Arrival Mountain of Heavenly Devil Cult, Qin Mu led all the Hall Masters, Elders, and the rest of the cult to the graves of Heavenly King Qian and Heavenly King Lu. The latter had only left behind a pile of ashes while the former's body hadn't been found, so were buried in the grave were the clothes they had worn when they were alive. Qin Mu went forward and placed Crown Prince Ling Yuxia's head in front of the graves, and everyone offered incense and paid their respects. "Two Heavenly Kings, if your spirits can hear me, you can rest in peace now, Heavenly King," you prayed. "Now that heaven is sending disasters on us, troubled times and calamities are inevitable. Two Heavenly King senior brothers, do protect our sacred cult." After everyone paid their respects, they dispersed. Heavenly King Yu came to Qin Mu's side and hesitated before asking, "Cult Master is still returning to eternal peace?" Qin Mu nodded. Heavenly King Yu was puzzled. "This time our sacred cult took Imperial Preceptor and killed the fake emperor as well as numerous strong practitioners of Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery, so I'm afraid that the emperor will be guarding against us." Isn't Cult Master worried about going back? Qin Mu looked at the gravestones of the two heavenly kings and said with a peaceful expression, Tao Sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery are still around, so the most important thing for the Emperor is to get rid of these two big sacred grounds. Without getting rid of them first, he won't lay a hand on our heavenly saint cult. Only once he cleans up those will we need to be careful. As for now, there's no need to worry. Heavenly King Yu thought over it and realized that it was indeed logical. Qin Mu walked towards the sacred tree and gently touched its grain. Lifting his head up to look at the crown, he said, the path of the saint is none other than the everyday use of common people. Heavenly King Yu, do you really think we can change the great Tao of heaven and earth? Heavenly King Yu walked forward and said, I'm naturally dumb and the question Cult Master asked is too profound, I'm afraid I'm unable to answer it. However, I know that there were no roads in the past, but as more people started walking, a road was formed. People then disliked having to walk in the mud when it started raining, and so they covered the roads with slabs of stone. The roads then became much easier to walk on. After that, people found walking slow, so they created wheels and vehicles. That's how horse carriages started to sprint through the roads. I think there was never a road for horse carriages, but after humans created it, there became a new addition to the great Tao of heaven and earth. Qin Mu was stunned. Heavenly King Yu continued, after that, people found horse carriages slow and created ships that could fly in the sky. They didn't have copper and gold, so they extracted them out from ores. Some letters were too far to be delivered, so they created flying mail. I think, as more and more things get created by the humans, the great Tao of heaven and earth gradually increases as well. Qin Mu was slightly in a daze. He saw that the sacred tree only had one trunk, but it branched out, and those branches had even more branches. While faced with that sight, he couldn't help revealing a smile. In the past, when winter came to the north, it was hard for them to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, but now that there are flying ships, the fruits and vegetables from the south can be transported to the north in a matter of days. In the past, there were inhospitable natural environments where demons roamed. Now we can cast spells to change the terrain, transforming barren hills and wild rivers into verdant hills and limpid water. In the past, the lands were infertile and not many crops could be produced, but now we can transform infertile land into fertile land, Heavenly King Yu said. In the past, wind, rain, thunder, and lightning were meteorological phenomenon, but now people can control these things. Cult Master, have we changed the great Tao of heaven and earth? Qin Mu nodded and smiled, I think we have. Cult Master, I'm naturally dumb. You aren't dumb at all. Qin Mu broke him off and smiled. Heavenly King Yu, you're a capable person, there's no need to always be so humble. What did you want to ask just now? Cult Master said earlier that the Emperor might make a move on our Heavenly Saint cult after he eradicates the two big sacred grounds. I wonder if Cult Master has any countermeasures? Maybe Cult Master can also be an Emperor. Qin Mu shook his head and said, I won't. As long as what the Emperor is doing is similar to our goals, it doesn't matter if I'm the Emperor or not. Furthermore, Imperial Preceptor is now the fourth Heavenly King of our sacred cult. If he doesn't meet with an accident, how would the Emperor make a move on us? In addition, I'm afraid it won't be that easy to eradicate Tao Sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery. Don't think too much, I've come to eternal peace just for experience and cultivation. Qin Mu left Saint Arrival Mountain and returned to Imperial College. Ji Linuan immediately ran over and held a banquet to welcome him back. Qin Mu stared with eyes wide open, torn between laughter and tears. He smiled and asked, Lord Ji, is there a need for this? Ji Linuan smiled and said, as fellow practitioners of the Devil Path, we naturally have to support one another. Cult Master Qin, is Junior Protector Sword still to your liking? It is. I'm not returning it, Qin Mu explained. The rules of our great ruins. I know. Ji Linuan laughed loudly. I stayed in Great Ruins for 200 years and I know its rules. Things that got scammed with one's abilities are never returned. You see? Aren't you regarding me as an outsider again? Ha 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 ha. I've stayed in Great Ruins for 200 years, so Great Ruins can be considered to be partly my homeland. We're half fellow countrymen. Now that Cult Master Qin has returned from our homeland, how can I not treat you to a meal to relieve the feeling of homesickness? Qin Mu was flabbergasted and sighed. Lord Gu's realm is too high, this little brother admires you. I dare not, I dare not. Cult Master Qin is the talented youth, born a hero. After they flattered each other, Gu Linwan sighed ruefully. When I first saw you in Great Ruins, I instantly knew you weren't any mediocre talent, but bound to achieve meteoric success in your career, yet never would have I expect this day to come so fast. Cult Master Qin. Sai, ain't I regarding you as an outsider by calling you Cult Master Qin? Cult Master, due to unforeseen circumstances, there are quite a lot of empty positions among the first and second ranking officials in the Imperial Court. Could Cult Master help to pull some strings? Qin Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, Lord Gu, I'm just a fifth-ranking little official. If Cult Master doesn't regard me as an outsider, you can call me Linwan. Qin Mu composed himself and said, I'm merely a fifth-ranking palace grandee without any real power in hand. Where do I have the rights to ask questions regarding the promotions of first and second-ranking officials? Truth be told, the sword that killed the Crown Prince was this junior protector sword that I scammed from Lord Gu. The Emperor is actually bearing a grudge in his heart and has some worries towards my heavenly saint cult. If I tried to put in a word to raise the rank of Lord Gu, I would actually be harming you. Gu Linwan smiled. That's indeed the case, Cult Master is wise. Let me propose a toast to you. He was an understanding man, and the motive behind his invitation to the banquet wasn't to make Qin Mu put in a word to the Emperor for him to rise in ranks. It was to make friends with Qin Mu and resolve their earlier grudges. No matter if Qin Mu was or wasn't the Emperor's favorite person now, he had to make friends with him. The Devil Cult Master of Heavenly Devil Cult was in existence on the same level as Rulai and Dao Master. Building a good relationship with Qin Mu was equivalent to building a good relationship with Rulai or Dao Master, and if that could be done with just a banquet, it was naturally a profitable bargain. After the banquet, Gu Linwan personally sent Qin Mu back to Scholar's residence. On their way back, Qin Mu was bewildered when he noticed some foreigners at Imperial College. After the rebellion, the new Crown Prince abolished the treaty the renegade had signed and took back the lands. Some of the foreign countries were terrified, so they sent over peaceful envoys to learn the culture of eternal peace. Gu Linwan could see his suspicions and said, the Crown Prince permitted it. He permitted foreigners to seek knowledge in eternal peace while some descendants of aristocrats would be learning in Imperial College. Qin Mu nodded, then suddenly saw a familiar face and was slightly stunned. He smiled towards a youth and called out, Pan Gong So. That youth who was from the barbarian race in the prairie turned back to look at Qin Mu with puzzlement in his eyes. There were numerous retainers from his foreign country following behind him, and two of them were great shamans of Roland's Golden Palace. Pan Gong So asked the person beside him in a low voice, and a great shaman immediately said something to him in a low voice. Pan Gong So suddenly understood and returned a greeting to Qin Mu indifferently. So it's Heavenly Devil Cult Master. What's the matter, Cult Master? Qin Mu was stunned again and just shook his head. Nothing. Pan Gong So and the rest walked away. Qin Mu frowned slightly, and Gu Linwan caught it. He asked, Cult Master, you recognize this Pan Gong So? He's the youngest son of barbarian Di Empire's Khan. I once saw him practicing his punches at the border, and his fist skills have a unique bearing, which should stem from a unique constitution. Qin Mu looked at the back of Pan Gong So and pondered over it. He once challenged Chancellor Ba Shan and said he will definitely defeat Chancellor Ba Shan in the future, giving me a deep impression of him. Why does it seem like he just met me for the first time? Gu Linwan smiled and said, with the nature of a youth, he must have forgotten. Qin Mu returned to Scholar's residence, where the dragon Chelin lay outside the house. When he came into the room, he felt that it was lonely and somehow wrong. If only Linga was here. He sighed to himself. If Hu Linga was here, she would definitely tidy up the room so this place wouldn't so messy. The entire room would also be arranged comfortably. Suddenly, the low and muffled voice of the dragon Chelin came from outside. Young lady, who are you looking for? Is your Cult Master Qin around? A pleasant voice asked. He is. I'm going in. Okay. Qin Mu immediately walked out of the room and saw Ling Yuxiu pushing the door. This young lady was charming as she smiled with her red lips and white teeth. She wore a gown with a red overlap and collar. When she walked into the courtyard, an air brimming with youthfulness bombarded Qin Mu and made his heart race slightly. The one who herds cows. The girl's eyes were shining brightly as she walked over with a smile. The big dog at your door is quite easy to talk to. I'm going to put him on the table for the next New Year's dinner. He can't even guard a door properly. Qin Mu said ruthlessly. The dragon Chilean's voice came from outside. Cult Master, I heard everything. I wanted you to hear it. You only know how to eat besides sleeping. Qin Mu examined this princess in detail and saw that she was becoming more and more beautiful, even if her face still had the childish nature of an infant. However, she was still taller than Qin Mu and was a big young lady. Her spring gown couldn't hide her alluring figure, the two melons that were about to burst out, making it hard for him to move his gaze away from her body. Qin Mu had also started to grow taller recently, and he was doing it as frantically as the weeds in a desolate land once spring came. The last time they've met, this princess was still a wild lass who wore male clothing, was very free and at ease. Ling Yuxiu came to the front of the yellow pear tree in the courtyard and only saw small buds. However, the blossoms needed to open up first and the stamens to pop their heads from the tender petals. Ling Yuxiu stretched her slender jade hands to fiddle with the flowers and smiled. You're pretty interesting, to plant a pear tree on a jade mountain. When the pear blossoms, I must definitely come to admire. Don't move. Qin Mu's eyes lighted up, and he said, stay in this posture. Give me a second. He quickly took out his brush, ink, paper, and inkstone to paint. Ling Yuxiu was a little impatient and said, you done yet? My arm is already aching. Right away. Qin Mu was about to finish the painting, but he stopped at the last stroke, taking out his seal to stamp on the painting before placing down the last stroke with a smile. It's done. Ling Yuxiu came over and looked at his painting. She saw that she looked slightly shy in the painting, and it was evident that Qin Mu had managed to capture the bashfulness that had poured out from her heart. Such likeness, Ling Yuxiu exclaimed in admiration. Why did you have to stamp your seal first before drawing the last stroke? My painting skill is too good. If I finish the last stroke first, you will walk down from the painting and run away. This stamp is also called a seal. Take a look at the picture on the seal. It isn't my surname but a kind of sealing rune instead, Qin Mu explained. Ling Yuxiu went up to take a look at the seal and the two of them huddled together. Qin Mu's gaze shifted toward the face of the girl and saw the soft redness on her fair cheek as well as her bright and clear eyes. While she looked at the seal seriously, her fair neck was very moving and her serious attitude made his heart race. It's really sealing runes. Ling Yuxiu was astonished and said curiously, if this seal is wiped away, can I really walk out of the painting? Qin Mu nodded and said, what I use is bestowing soul skill and bestowing the divine soul with a dot using mutual sensitivity. However, I only succeeded once and I don't know if it would have worked this time. Still, it's best to seal the painting in case you run away. Ling Yuxiu looked at him shyly and immediately rolled up the painting. This painting is mine, don't steal it from me. That's right, I've almost forgotten about the task at hand. Father has summoned you into the palace, he said it's for diagnosing his injuries. I met the eunuch sending the decree and took his job. Qin Mu tidied up his clothes and said, are you coming along with me? All right. We haven't met for quite a while and I have things I want to tell you. The young man and young woman walked out of the room, and the dragon Chilean raised his head. Cult Master, I'll guard the door and definitely not let anyone in. Got it, Qin Mu said. Perform well and I won't put you on the table for New Year. And also, train more, remember all the muscles on the green bull's body. How can you defeat him like this? The two people walked out of scholars' residence and saw many scholars greeting them with smiles on the way. However, most of them looked terrified, so it was evident that they had heard that Qin Mu was the devil cult master of Heavenly Devil Cult, a fellow of savage nature. He had chopped off Ling Yuxiu's head in front of the emperor and was truly fiendish. Outside Scholars' residence, Chancellor Ba Shan walked over with long strides, and behind him were two scholars. One of them was Wei Yong and the other was Yu Qinghong. These two people had great improvements in their cultivation, so it was obvious that they had received quite a lot of benefits from cultivating with Chancellor Ba Shan. Behind them came a big green bull that was incomparably robust. He walked on the road with 2 legs, and lumps of muscle covered his entire body. Fire spewed out from his nostrils, and he looked extremely fiendish with a peony in his mouth. Chancellor Ba Shan stopped and smiled. "Cult Master Qin, you two eloping?" "We're not," Ling Yuxiu said angrily. "Don't speak nonsense, Teacher Ba Shan, father has summoned him to the palace." Chancellor Ba Shan laughed loudly and said to Qin Mu, "I met that Pan Gong Tso brat of barbarian Di Empire just now, and he has become very strange. Even though he recognizes me, he's no longer that Pan Gong Tso." Qin Mu nodded and said, "I also have this feeling. Pan Gong Tso didn't recognize me, and he seemed like a different person. His abilities are very strong, no weaker than yours," Chancellor Ba Shan said. Qin Mu's blinked and asked in doubt, "No weaker than mine?" "I'm very strong." Chancellor Ba Shan gave him a look. "His 6 directions divine treasure is about to break through, and I can also feel a kind of terrifying power hiding in his body. You might not be able to beat him. Could this barbarian brat have had a miraculous encounter? Yet it doesn't seem like a miraculous encounter, but more like spirit possession. Go and meet the Emperor first, I'll come and find you later." Qin Mu came to the palace with Ling Yuxiu to see that both the Emperor and Imperial Preceptor were there. Beside them was also an ugly man whose face was covered in warts, and he was diagnosing their injuries. Qin Mu walked in, and Emperor Yang Feng raised his head to reveal a smile. "Palace Grandee is here." The man whose face was covered in warts looked at Qin Mu and his mouth broke into a grin. He was like a huge toad that had transformed into a spirit, and his smile looked like a crying face. "Junior brother, is teacher, that old man, still doing well?" Qin Mu stopped in his footsteps and stretched his hand out to block Ling Yuxiu's way. "Little Poison King? Junior brother seems to be pretty wary of me." Little Poison King smiled. "Even though we are senior and junior brothers, we have never met before, we should have been closer." Qin Mu lowered his arms. He had heard rumors about this Little Poison King and heard Empress Dowager mention him before. The reason why Grandpa Apothecary had sliced off his face and went to hide in great ruins was also because of this person. Little Poison King was Apothecary's proudest disciple, yet he had betrayed Apothecary and leaked the news that Jade Face Playboy was none other than Poison King. Jade Face Playboy and Poison King had been 2 people in the martial world. One of them was a free and romantic man that was exceptionally handsome. He was tall, attractive, heroic, and treated everyone politely like the spring wind, leaving lovers everywhere. He didn't need to womanize, for women would come to him by themselves. Everyone adored and admired him, so even though men were usually envious of him, they couldn't bring themselves to hate him. Poison King, however, was ferocious-looking and his methods were ruthless, his infamy spreading far and wide. He had once killed countless experts and even eradicated a sect of the righteous path, poisoning everyone in it. Not one person was left alive in it. Even Dao sect and Great Thunderclap Monastery had many monks and Taoists dead from his poison. Poison King's cultivation wasn't high, but his abilities were extremely formidable. No matter if it was poison or venomous insects, his attainments had reached the peak. Numerous ambushes to catch him had been set up by both the righteous and devil path, and even a few cult master level existences were mobilized, but none of them had managed to take him down. All of them instead died of poison. Poison King wore a green mask with tusks, so no one knew his true appearance. It wasn't until his disciple Little Poison King leaked the truth that the people learned that Poison King was the dissolute Jade Face Playboy. Once his identity was revealed, things became complicated. Some people wanted to kill him, while some women fought among themselves for him, and even a powerful woman like Empress Dowager joined in the fight. This gave Apothecary no choice but to slice off his face and abandon all feelings. He then went to hide in great ruins, not daring to step out of them for the next half of his lifetime. However, Little Poison King's days weren't good as well. Empress Dowager and the rest of the women vented out their anger on his head and chased after his life everywhere. Little Poison King had also almost been forced into hiding in great ruins, but he was lucky since Imperial Preceptor took him in. In regards to Apothecary's encounters, Qin Mu had only heard rumors and didn't know what had happened exactly. However, he knew Little Poison King had inherited Apothecary's teaching, and his attainments with poison were already catching up to those of Apothecary. Emperor Yangfeng smiled and said, "Cult Master, I have invited you and Little Poison King because both of you are disciples of Jade Face Poison King. One is proficient in using poison while the other is proficient in medical treatments. With both of you working together, you just might be able to cure Imperial Preceptor and me." Qin Mu revealed a smile. "At your Majesty's command. I would also like to see senior brothers trade." Little Poison King checked the Emperor's injuries and examined the effects of Qin Mu's treatments. The warts on his face became more and more terrifying as he smiled. "Your trade is not bad, solving 1,000 opportunities poison in one night." On the other hand, Qin Mu was examining Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor. After returning to the capital city, it was Little Poison King who had been treating Imperial Preceptor's injuries. He said indifferently, "You ain't bad as well, the way you used 1,000 opportunities poison was marvelous." A wart near the arm of Little Poison King suddenly burst open with a pop and some transparent little spiders came climbing out. These little spiders spewed out webs which hit the heart of Emperor Yanfeng's brows. They then climbed into the heart of Emperor Yanfeng's brows through the spider silks and tunneled into his spirit embryo divine treasure. "I didn't want to poison her to death. With my skills, it isn't troublesome to poison a cult master," Little Poison King said leisurely. "No matter which cult master of which cult, poisoning them is no trouble for me." Qin Mu didn't raise his eyebrows. Instead, 2 more heavens appeared in his eyes as he used green heaven's eyes to examine Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's injuries. "Even if you had poisoned her body to death, I could have still kept her soul and saved her after detoxing the poison. Furthermore, Cult Master ain't somebody you can poison at will. For a Cult Master, there's no need to even meet you to kill you. Especially for devil cults, they have 1,000 ways to have a person die in an unfathomable way yet still as it should be by rights. When senior brother finds himself dead in a smelly sore one day, he will understand." "Is that so?" Little Poison King had a sinister expression and his smile was even uglier than a crying face. "That's right," Qin Mu smiled like a flower. The two of them looked each other in the eyes. Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's hearts were palpitating from fear. The moment the two people had met each other, they started fighting with words and their murderous intent was flourishing more and more. Ling Yuxiu blinked, her gaze moving between the two people. She felt that the situation was going out of control, so she smiled and said, "Little Poison King, Cult Master Qin, the treatment is more important." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor gave a cough and Emperor Yangfeng gave a cough as well before saying, "Yuxiu, fall back first." Ling Yuxiu understood and walked out of the hall. The warts on Little Poison King's face burst open and insects that looked like fish flew out to tunnel into the other divine treasures of Emperor Yangfeng. After examining the injuries there, he said, "You are really not bad, getting rid of the hidden damages in His Majesty's divine treasures. The injuries on his corporeal body and soul are completely healed, but it's a pity your medical expertise is still lacking and can't treat the divine treasures." Qin Mu looked at the remnants of the god's divine art in Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body and saw that Little Poison King had used poisonous substances which he transformed into technique-dissolving spirit silks to coil around those remnants. He was trying to wear them down since the poison silks had the effect of dissolving techniques, divine arts, and even vital qi. However, the effects were minimal when against the divine arts of gods. "Your poison technique has reached perfection, the realm of having both material form and internal spirit. Theses technique-dissolving spirit silks were used marvelously, but they still can go up another level." Qin Mu smiled. The gazes of the two people met once again. Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's scalps turned numb. If these two people were to battle, they would probably use poison and medicine on their bodies. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, "Both of you are divine physicians and come from the same teacher, do you have any solutions?" Little Poison King immediately said, I am already quite confident in treating His Majesty's injuries. Since His Majesty's divine treasures are destroyed, I can fetch the divine treasures of a living human to transfer them over." Emperor Yangfeng frowned. "How certain are you?" This little poison king hesitated and took a glance at Qin Mu. "I'm proficient in using poison, so I can't really say how certain I am." Qin Mu said, "Imperial Preceptor's injuries can't be solved with just technique dissolving spirit silks, for the problem still lies in the remnants of the divine arts left behind by the god being too strong. What I think is we should do is find a few dozen strong practitioners of the cult master level to suppress those remnants, which would allow Imperial Preceptor to utilize his own cultivation to refine them." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor shook his head and said, "There are indeed a few dozen strong practitioners of cult master level within the borders of Eternal Peace Empire, but it'd be hard to gather everyone to help me. 2 divine physicians, since one of you use poison and one of you use medicine, you guys just might be able to complement each other." Qin Mu took a look at Little Poison King, and Little Poison King also looked at him. "My master Jade Face Poison King is matchless in his poison and medicine. He can use medicine to boost poison and poison to boost medicine," said Little Poison King. "How many times can you boost my poison?" Qin Mu replied coldly, "We'll have to see how intense Senior Brother's toxicity is. I can use medicine to greatly supplement His Majesty's vital chi and raise his life force, allowing His Majesty's life force and vital chi to cure the injuries in his divine treasures." "How intense is your poison? Can it raise the vital chi and life force of my medicine by 30 to 50 times?" "As intense as you want." Little Poison King sneered. "I'm afraid your tonic can't handle my toxins. To refine the remnants of the divine arts in Imperial Preceptor, I need the toxicity of technique dissolving spirit silks to be raised by 30 to 50 times. With such high toxicity, even gods can be poisoned to death and dissolve into skeletons. Do you have the ability?" Qin Mu gritted his teeth. "I can try." Venomous insects climbed out from Emperor Yanfeng's body and tunneled back into the warts on Little Poison King's hands and face. "If you can't refine such a tonic, I'll poison you to death." He chuckled. Qin Mu's expression was indifferent. "If you use the wrong toxin, I will ensure your life so I can bring you back to great ruins." Little Poison King's expression changed drastically, and he let out a cold snort. With a raise of his brush, he wrote down a list of toxic herbs. Qin Mu also wrote down a prescription. "Your Majesty, send people to grab the herbs." Both of them threw down their brushes and sat down silently. Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at each other in dismay. These two had a big temper and didn't look like they planned to treat their injuries. On the contrary, they looked like they were going to take their lives. Emperor Yangfeng coughed and summoned the Imperial physicians waiting outside the hall. "Grab the herbs quickly." The Imperial physicians immediately took the prescriptions and hurried on their way. "Your tonic is quite intense." Little Poison King smiled in a sinister manner. Qin Mu ignored him, and after some time, the Imperial physicians finally brought over all the toxic and healing herbs that they required. Qin Mu immediately made his move and extracted the medicinal energy. He executed his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique and transformed into the cow-headed human-bodied Mars Sovereign and the tiger-headed human-bodied Venus Sovereign from time to time. He also transformed into Mercury Sovereign, Jupiter Sovereign, and Saturn Sovereign, transforming his form and vital chi to extract out all kinds of medicinal energies. Meanwhile, Little Poison King used the toxic herbs to raise his insects. He let them eat the poisonous substances before refining the little creatures into poisonous pills, which he used to feed other venomous insects. Repeating this several times, he finally raised a huge pitch-black spider with red eyes. Poisonous gas actually congealed around it and didn't show any sign of dispersing. On Qin Mu's side, he took a few seeds and started planting flowers in the hall. He planted the seeds in the spirit pills that he had refined and used Earth Eon creation technique so the flowers would absorb the medicinal energies of the spirit pills. Not long later, the flowers bloomed and bore fruits. He then plucked the spirit fruits that he required and refined them again. After repeating this for a few more times, the herbs that had piled up into a mountain were refined into 7 spirit pills and 1 red pellet. Qin Mu picked them all up and looked at Little Poison King. Little Poison King had by then refined the huge spider to death and created a string of spirit silks that practically couldn't be seen and a small bottle of poisonous liquid. The two of them looked each other in the eyes, and Qin Mu threw the red pellet to Little Poison King while Little Poison King threw the poisonous liquid to him. Qin Mu squeezed out a smile and said gently, "Your Majesty, it's time for your medicine." Emperor Yanfeng's heart began to pound and his body twitched as he looked at the 7 spirit pills and the bottle of poisonous liquid Qin Mu was holding. "Minister, the toxicity. It is very great." Qin Mu took a glance at Little Poison King. "If your Majesty dies, I will take revenge for your Majesty." Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at the red pellet and spider silks in front of him with hesitation. Little Poison King said, "Don't worry, Imperial Preceptor. You're fine, you're fine." Qin Mu's figure transformed into a shadow and tunneled into Emperor Yanfeng's divine treasures. He placed the 7 spirit pills into the 7 realms. He poured a few droplets of poisonous liquid onto each of the spirit pills before withdrawing. Little Poison King smacked the spirit silks into Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body and gave a pull with his hand to pull out a thread of spider silk from his patient's mouth. He wrapped the spider silk around the red pellet before stuffing it into Imperial Preceptor's mouth. A world-shaking bang came from Emperor Yanfeng's body, and all the hair on his body suddenly began to grow frantically. His bones also did the same, and in an instant, they increased by a huge chunk, to the point that his pants could no longer cover him. His head had also grown larger. The beard grew outwards like weeds and the hair on his head stretched outwards in all directions. His leg and chest hair had become incomparably thick, ripping even the dragon robe. Not long after that, Emperor Yanfeng became a giant that was over 30 yards tall and laid on the ground, unable to move. Half of the hall was covered in hair and the emperor was drowned out in this dense thicket. "Your poison is a little intense, eh, senior brother?" The corners of Qin Mu's eyes twitched. On the other side, transparent spider silk suddenly started pouring out from Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Even the pores of his skin had quite a number of spider silks pouring out, coiling around him. He soon looked like a huge dumpling that was wrapped sturdily. Little Poison King said, looked over at him with a grave expression. "Isn't your tonic a little too nourishing?" The two of them looked at each other before raising their brushes to write down prescriptions again. When they wanted to call the emperor to order people to grab the herbs, only then did they remember that the emperor was still drowned out by the hair. The two of them could only give a cough and summon the imperial physicians outside the hall by themselves. The imperial physicians that were waiting for orders trembled in fear when they saw the thick hair that was spreading from inside the hall and crawling down the steps. Not long after that, the imperial physicians came back with the herbs and Qin Mu started refining once again. Little Poison King also hurried to raise his insects. Qin Mu pulled out his 2 pig slaughtering knives and chopped off countless hairs to find the emperor. It required quite some effort to send the medicine into him. On the other side, the warts on Little Poison King's face burst open and venomous insects brought the medicine that was refined into the cocoon, sending it into Imperial Preceptor's body. Crap! The two of them observed the situation, and their complexions turned green. It seems the poisons and the medicine are a little imbalanced. Even though the hair no longer grew on the emperor's sides, poison had started to pour from his orifices, while Imperial Preceptor's hairs started to grow. The two of doctors picked up their brushes in a hurry and started to write prescriptions again. Qin Mu and the Little Poison King had changed the prescriptions 7 to 8 times, and they were getting slightly flustered. It was the first time they were working together, after all, so there would always be some places that weren't as they wanted, some places where they couldn't complement each other perfectly. Furthermore, both of them wanted to outdo each other, so the tonic that Qin Mu gave Little Poison King wasn't just 30 to 50 times stronger but 60 times stronger instead. The bottle of poisonous liquid that Little Poison King had given Qin Mu also had a higher toxicity. The two of them pitted their abilities against each other, and the ones suffering were the Emperor and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, who got tortured endlessly. What's more, they couldn't even move, struggle, or call for help. The Emperor's body started shrinking, returning to its ordinary size before long. However, he didn't stop there and soon reached the size of a newborn baby. I should really have planted executioners in this hall to execute these two scoundrels of divine physicians, thought the emperor, who was drowning in his own hair. On the other side, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's body was still swelling. And not only that, for he could feel something growing on his buttocks. It seemed like a furry tail. His armpits felt itchy, and he felt a few more bones growing around his armpits. When they cracked and grew outwards, it seemed like he was growing 2 wings. It would have been still fine if he had grown 2 huge wings, but the crux was that the wings stopped growing after reach a foot's length. The bodies of the 2 patients were sometimes cold and sometimes warm. Sometimes they felt they had descended into hell and rolled on mountains of knives, while at other times they felt as if they were becoming immortals and felt incomparably comfortable. However, being comfortable was the most dangerous, as that was their souls dissolving. Sometimes, pain came flooding over from all parts of their body and was 100 to 1,000 times more painful than extreme heartache. Sometimes, they felt as if there were tens of thousands of needles stabbing their bodies, and at other times, they felt as if they had been soaked in an unbearably acidic vinegar vat. In the hall, Qin Mu sat on the hair that filled the ground, holding the brush in one hand and resting his chin on the other as he fell into a daze. Not far away, Little Poison King's brows were tensed and he paced around anxiously. He kept on thinking about how he could continue the treatment. Both of them were stumped with a difficult problem. Qin Mu had raised his brush several times but could never write anything down. Little Poison King had also raised his brush several times and placed it down again. Lin Yuxiu at that moment popped her head into and saw the 2 troubled guys, so she asked softly, "The one that herds cows, how is it going?" Before Qin Mu could answer, Little Poison King chuckled. "You are the 6th princess, right?" Lin Yuxiu thought for a moment and said, "Now that my elder brother is the eldest prince, I'm indeed number 6. Eldest prince is also the current crown Prince Yuxiu." Little Poison King then added in a harsh tone, "Congratulations, 6th princess, due to the quack's treatment, your brother will soon ascend the throne to be the emperor." Lin Yuxiu jumped in shock and looked at Qin Mu anxiously. Almost sobbing, she stuttered, "T the one that herds cows, you going to cure father to death?" "Don't be afraid, sister, he won't die." Qin Mu consoled her. He then sneered, "Before I cure the emperor to death, Imperial Preceptor will be treated to death by that idiot. Without the support of Imperial Preceptor, your brother will be overthrown in a matter of days even if he becomes the emperor." Lin Yuxiu was about to cry. "You guys are just scaring me, right?" Little Poison King mocked, "Even if Imperial Preceptor would die in my hands, it would be because he was nourished to death by your tonic." Qin Mu then turned to ridicule him back. "The emperor may be treated to death by me, but he would have died under your poison, so you can forget about walking out of the palace alive." The 2 of them stared at each other, and anger blazed in their eyes as they wanted more than anything to poison each other to death. Lin Yuxiu was furious and shouted out, "Both of you, if father and Imperial Preceptor die from your treatments, both of you can forget about leaving the palace alive. Where are the executioners?" "Executioners?" Emperor Yangfeng and Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor both let out a sigh of relief as they thought to themselves, "Yuxiu, 6th princess, is still the sensible one, otherwise, if those 2 scoundrels continued to fight like this, we would end up dead or about to die." The imperial bodyguards of the palace swarmed over and came to stand guard outside the hall. Lin Yuxiu looked at them with murder in her eyes as she put her hands on her waist to scold the 2 of them. "The executioners are right outside, so both of you have to listen to me. Since one of you can't suppress the other's tonic and the other can't handle their poison, then both of you shall swap. That ugly one, you shall treat father, the one that herds cows, you shall treat Imperial Preceptor." Qin Mu rose to look at Little Poison King and said solemnly, "Swap patients." Little Poison King's eyes lighted up, and he said, "If you treat Imperial Preceptor and I treat the Emperor, a miracle might just happen." The 2 of them immediately swapped patients and examined their situations. After it, they sighed in relief and looked each other in the eyes. Moments before, Qin Mu had begun planning to take the dragon Cheline and hide in Great Ruins, while Little Poison King had also planned to escape and lie low. As for the experts outside, it would be a stretch for them to hold these 2 divine doctors back. It was just a matter of a dosage of poison. However, after they swapped patients, they discovered they could clean up the mess the other had made, and this way, they wouldn't have to worry about escaping after causing the deaths of the emperor and imperial preceptor. Qin Mu and Little Poison King raised their brushes to write down the prescriptions for the imperial physicians to grab the herbs. The both of them diagnosed and treated their patients with great care, changing their prescriptions repeatedly. After close to 3 days, the hair on the emperor's body dropped off and the cocoon on imperial preceptor's body gradually vanished. The injuries on imperial preceptor's body gradually lessened and the remnants of the god's divine arts weakened. Eternal Peace imperial preceptor was also able to mobilize some cultivation. Even though the emperor's divine treasures were still in ruins, Little Poison King had used countless venomous spiders to carry over vital chi and life force to rebuild them. With the powerful life force from Qin Mu's medicine used for restoration, there should be no more big problems. Their injuries healing was just a matter of time. Ling Yuxiu summoned a few eunuchs to clean up the palace. These eunuchs filled up several carts of hair, and while another was filled up with tails, wings, extra arms, and legs that had dropped off from imperial preceptor. There really aren't any more big problems. Qin Mu looked at Little Poison King, and Little Poison King also looked over at him at that moment. They sneered at each other. Ling Yuxiu seemed to have met her greatest foes and immediately said nervously, "No more fighting." Qin Mu wrote down a prescription and made the imperial physicians grab the herbs. He stretched his body and smiled. "I won't fight with him. I'm tired after diagnosing and treating the emperor and imperial preceptor for the past few days. I'm going back to rest." Little Poison King also said in a sinister manner, "I'm also tired, so I have to return to sleep. You can leave the rest of the stuff to the quacks at the door." Ling Yuxiu looked at Little Poison King, then turned to Qin Mu and said, "The one that herds cows, let me send you back to Imperial College." Qin Mu hesitated, then shook his head. "No need, you also haven't rested for the past 2 days." "I must," the girl said firmly. Qin Mu saw that she was insistent on sending him and could only nod in agreement. The two of them then waited a moment for the imperial physicians to come back with the herbs. Little Poison King sniffed the air for the smell of herbs, but since they had used numerous herbs these days, the smell in the hall was thick, and it was hard for him to differentiate. Qin Mu took the herbs and Ling Yuxiu hurriedly went after him. Little Poison King also followed behind. When they passed by the Jade Band River in the palace, he suddenly jumped into the water with a plop and never came out after that. Ling Yuxiu looked down with a cry of astonishment. He escaped by the river. The one that herds cows, could he be afraid of you? Qin Mu shook his head. He isn't afraid of me, he's afraid of Empress Dowager. Just as he was saying that, Jade Band River suddenly rose into the sky, and the water floated in the sky like a huge silver-colored python. 2 palace maids raised lanterns and walked over to shine into the river. Countless sword lights in the flames of the lanterns shot off and went into Jade Band River. "Empress Dowager, that person is not in the river." The 2 palace maids with lanterns saluted a tall building at the side. Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu immediately looked towards there and saw Empress Dowager standing on the balcony. She had lifted one of her hands before, and that moment, she gently placed it down. The water of Jade Band River instantly whooshed downward and filled the canal. Qin Mu saluted the balcony and Empress Dowager smiled. "Little Divine Physician, is the Emperor cured?" Qin Mu said, "He still needs to recuperate and will recover to his peak in a few years." Empress Dowager nodded and said, "Yuxiu, bring these 2 palace maids with you to send Little Divine Physician off for me." Ling Yuxiu smiled. "I was just planning to return to Imperial College with him." Empress Dowager walked into the building, and the 2 palace maids carrying the lanterns followed behind Qin Mu and Ling Yuxiu. Walking out of the palace, Qin Mu suddenly stopped and told the 2 palace maids, "Go back, I won't need you for the journey ahead." The 2 palace maids were a pair of twins and they were alike in looks. They were both bright and quick-witted as they shook their heads in unison. "Empress Dowager has instructed us to send Divine Physician back to Imperial College." Qin Mu frowned slightly and said to Ling Yuxiu, "Sister, go back with them." Ling Yuxiu shook her head. "With me by your side, Little Poison King won't dare to lay his hands on you." Qin Mu sighed. "To us apothecaries, there's no one we don't dare to poison to death." I originally just needed to protect myself, but now I will have to protect you as well, so I'm afraid it might be a bit strenuous." That two palace maids giggled. What little divine physician said is truly interesting. You are still on 5 elements realm while little poison king and us sisters are on 7 stars realm. Furthermore, Empress Dowager has granted us a treasure to deal with little poison king. With us sisters around, if little poison king dares to come, he will definitely be taken down by us. Qin Mu shook his head and didn't persuade them to leave. Apothecaries can kill people regardless of their realm. You two are too naive. Even for me, poisoning strong practitioners of celestial being realm isn't a problem, so what do you think it's like for little poison king? It's fine even if you want to follow me, but be more alert, I'm afraid I can't look after both of you. The two palace maids giggled non-stop. There were many people on the street. And the two palace maids carried a lantern in front and at the back. Carrying a lantern in the morning was very eye-catching, but since they were dressed in the outfits of the palace, no one came forward to inquire about it. Imperial College was far from the palace, but after walking 6 to 7 miles, they still hadn't seen anything. Qin Mu refined medicine on the way and finally finished refining the few packets of herbs he had been carrying. He then stretched his hand into his Daotai sack, so only his arm and shoulder could be seen jerking gently. The hand technique that he executed and the medicine that was being refined in the Daotai sack could not be seen. The two palace maids were very alert, and any flies or spiders on the way were all slaughtered by the two women with sword lights. None of the insects could get close to them. As they continued, a chilly wind blew over, and the two women immediately roused their vital qi. The light of the lantern suddenly became brighter, and the lights formed 2 circular barriers to cover them, not allowing the wind to blow in. One of the palace maids laughed. Does little poison king only have these kinds of methods? Just as she said that, a delicate face suddenly turned black and she collapsed. Her sister behind also collapsed with a thud, no longer able to move. Ling Yuxia was startled and looked around in a hurry before asking, "Why are we fine?" Thud. She collapsed with her face facing upwards. After the 3 women collapsed, a few pitch-black tentacles covered in spikes crawled out from the ground. The lower legs of the women had been pricked by the tentacles, poisoning them. Qin Mu flicked his finger, and those tentacles flailed and dissolved with a sizzle, turning into small puddles. The ground trembled, and it seemed like there was a huge creature which moving under the ground. Qin Mu took out 3 spirit pills to suppress the toxicity of the poison so the trio would regain their consciousness. Suddenly, a grunt came from afar. "You gave tonic to my baby?" Boom! The ground trembled and split open, causing the houses to collapse. From beneath, a weird insect that was about 30 yards tall and hundreds of yards long tunneled out. Its entire body was covered with tentacles, and it was the Insect King that Little Poison King was raising. Just as Little Poison King returned this Insect King to his side, the Insect King's body started swelling from Qin Mu's tonic. He wasn't able to suppress it even if he wanted. At that moment, Little Poison King was pathetically sprawled on the back of the Insect King. "What are you waiting for?" Qin Mu asked the 2 palace maids beside him. They were still groggy, but they poured their vital qi into the lanterns when they heard him. The lantern light shone towards the Insect King like swords and pierced through the creature, turning it into a broken sieve. Little Poison King suffered numerous sword wounds and vanished into a puff of smoke. The 2 palace maids immediately shone down on the ground, and with the light from the lanterns, the ground actually became transparent. Their light could actually shine dozens of yards below the ground. However, the poison in the 2 women hadn't yet detoxified, it had only been suppressed by Qin Mu. They quickly felt the toxicity in their bodies about to break out again, so they didn't dare to activate their magic powers. Qin Mu said, "No need to chase him. He already suffered a defeat, and if you force him to the end of his rope, he could poison everyone in the capital city. Instead, I better cure the poison both of you received, otherwise, it will be too late." Qin Mu extracted a tiny drop of fresh blood from the 3 of them and saw that their blood was already black. Even though they were all poisoned by the same venomous king, the amount of venom in their bodies was different, so he had to help them separately. On the way, Qin Mu worked to identify the poison and cure them. By the time they reached Scholar's residence, even though the poison within the three women had been detoxified, there were still some remnants left, which made them lightheaded. Before they could even reach Qin Mu's room, they all collapsed onto the floor. Qin Mu frowned and dragged them all into his residence. He threw Ling Yuxiu and the two palace maids onto the bed before going back to close the door. At the door, the dragon Chilean said, "Cult Master, don't worry, I will definitely not let anyone come in. I understand very well in my heart." "You have done well," Qin Mu praised him. He was simply too exhausted for the past few days, so when he returned to his room, he laid down among the three women and fell asleep. As he slept, he suddenly felt a slight itch at his nose and guessed it was the hair from one of the girls. With a passing flip, he pushed one of them out of the bed. This video is end here. Like the video and subscribe to my channel.